Mr. Paul, many thanks. That was a very kind, indeed overly generous introduction. I am enormously grateful to you for making available the marvelous facilities of Credit Suisse so that all of us can gather tonight and consider a subject of importance to the United States. I am equally grateful to Noel Latif for inviting me to be part of this gathering. Noel and I began talking about a moment to come together and consider Kosovo some months ago, and no time quite seemed right. The crisis remains today in full swing, and so this moment is probably as good as any. I'm also delighted to be in the presence of many, many old friends. Bill Lures and Wendy in the front row. Wendy will not admit it, but she has been a major figure in trying to ensure that Kosovo emerges as not only an independent state, but a democratic state that is inclusive and treats all of its people fairly. So Wendy, thank you for your work, and I'm delighted to be in your presence tonight, and any difficult questions I'm going to send your direction. Ladies and gentlemen, the starting point is, as Mr. Paul pointed out, a month ago, yesterday, the 17th of February, Kosovo joined the ranks of independent nations. Independent, yes. Independent in a very special way, a supervised independence with an oversight body from the international community as described in the Ahtisaari plan, a independence that will have to be protected for some time to come by a NATO force that's been present for nearly 9 years and which today numbers some 16,000 men, including 1,200 Americans who, as a brigade-sized force, are actually in part deployed in northern Kosovo as we meet and speak together tonight. The event of Kosovo's independence, to me, is an enormously important event, not only for the United States that has invested so much in that country and in the region, but for Europe, and by extension, the rest of the world. It may not be the lead item on your evening news, but it's enormously important. The decision to reach independence, to my way of thinking, was inevitable. There was no way other than according Kosovo independence. The decision was right given the history, a history particularly over the past decade of quasi-independence under a UN tutelage, preceded by a nightmare decade of Serbian repression and violence at the end of the 1990s that forced nearly 1 million Kosovar Albanians out of their homes and driven towards the borders, tens of thousands of properties burned and destroyed, well better than 10,000 Kosovars killed in Slobodan Milosevic's repression. It was right, therefore, to take the consequences of the dreadful decade of the 90s and convert it into an independence of a people that wanted to stand on its own feet. It was right as a decision as well because there was really no alternative. It was inconceivable to me when I began my role as representative of the United States some 2 years ago. It was inconceivable to me that the population, the majority population, the 90% plus majority population would ever go back and live again under Serbian rule. It was inconceivable to me that even the framework of autonomy that emerged in the last 6 months of the negotiations would begin to provide adequate expression for the peoples, the majority peoples of Kosovo. So if you weren't going to go back under Serbian rule, if a Serbian flag was not, or sovereignty was not to pertain for Kosovo, then the alternative of continuing UN trusteeship, if you will, it wasn't formally that, that was inconceivable as well. The Secretary General made it very clear, both Kofi Annan and then his successor, Ban Ki-moon, that the UN had carried out its mission, it had exhausted its mission, its ability to carry on and be able to govern a territory had been achieved, and little more could be done. I say that because there are many friends of the great institution of the United Nations in this room tonight, and I ask all of you to think about our responsibilities if we want the United Nations to be able to hold the receptacle while peace is negotiated and made. Then one has to let the UN off the hook when the job is done. You cannot forever condemn the United Nations to try to hold in place a situation which we, members of the international community, cannot resolve politically. Excuse me. So Kosovo, settling Kosovo, reaching final status was important for the United Nations. There was not a choice. There was neither a return to Serbian sovereignty nor a continuation of the United Nations. And if one was to reach final status, then independence was the only logical outcome. But I'm going to argue, furthermore, the decision to reach final status and arrive at independence for Kosovo was right for a number of other reasons, all important to us as Americans. The first reason is that until Kosovo was settled, until there was a definition of its future, until its borders had been set, the crisis that roiled the 1990s and over the breakup of the former Yugoslavia would not be over. Kosovo was the last of the Yugoslav territories that cried out for definition. And until that definition occurred, everyone in the region would be sitting on the edge of their chairs, notably Serbia, which needs to have an opportunity to reflect on its own future, decide where it wants to go. And as long as Kosovo remained undecided, Serbia would be undecided about her own future. But I also believe that settling Kosovo now makes it possible, not immediately, but possible, for the region of southwestern Europe and the Balkans to begin to evolve towards a better future, to be part of the European Union. And like those other elements of the other recent additions to the European Union, to find ways to bury the problems of ethnicity in a greater European economic family and a political family. Look today across Eastern Europe where ethnic problems were part of our realities, Hungarians in Romania, Hungarians in Slovakia, minorities in the Baltic nations. There is a way inside of Europe to work out the rights of minorities, and therefore the EU is a necessary outcome. Kosovo's settlement now means that every piece of the Balkans can look towards inclusion in the Brussels family. But I think furthermore, for us as Americans, with Kosovo settled, the last serious territorial quarrel in Europe has been put behind us, and we can literally contemplate a free, whole, and secure. And until Kosovo was settled and settles down, a job still to be done, that prospect was not likely. I was proud, finally, to be part of American diplomacy during better than 2 years, in which we set our minds on retying